Gods and Crake and Bake are about Pelops, a chef in ancient Greece. Now, one reviewer actually described these books as Xena meets Iron Chef, and it's actually a pretty accurate description. Pelops has had a bit of a rough childhood, being killed by his father and cooked up in a stew and getting served to the gods for dinner and all. He does get reconstituted and is gifted by the gods with a talent for the culinary arts. And he's been working as a celebrity chef in Athens ever since. All things considered, he didn't do too badly. But Pelops started out as a prince, and so not too badly is never quite good enough, and he's always trying to get ahead. Now, when Crake and Bake opens, Perseus has killed the Kraken. And not only is there a glut of Kraken meat on the market, the great Perseus himself has come to Athens on a victory tour. And just before the piece that I'm going to read to you, Pelops has discovered that he and Perseus share kin. Perseus is a son of Zeus. Pelops is Zeus's grandson. Now, Pelops, being Pelops, decides to try and cash in on this. And he manages to be hired as the chef at an elegant dinner party in Perseus' honor, at which he hopes their relationship will be revealed. Archestratus' guests were of impeccable lineage and indisputable wealth. Hermogenes, who had seen many of them arrive, had rather cheekily described them as the old gaffers who ruled the city. And I saw what he meant as soon as I entered the room. Snowy-haired, exuding dignity and refinement, not one of them was under 50, with the exception of the guest of honor, of course. He looked to be about 10 years younger than myself, a mere youth. And he possessed the firm skin, superb musculature, and astonishing good looks of the very young, the very fit, and the very lucky. Given his divine lineage, his physical appearance was hardly surprising. As befit his status, the golden-haired Perseus lounged in the place of honor on the first seat of the middle couch. My employer reclined beside him, with the remaining guests ranged around them, their slaves squatting on the floor behind each dining couch. I thought the guests seemed oddly ill at ease, and quite a few appeared to have imbibed more wine than was good for them. But before I could think further on it, Archestratus was smiling and motioning me into the room with what appeared to be relief. How very odd. My friends and honored guests, he began graciously, holding his hand up to halt the conversation, though in truth it was unusually quiet in the room. Allow me to present to you the chef. Well done, Chef Pelops, well done. Truly a marvel. Citizen and slave trained their attention on me. The guests tapped their hands together in applause, murmuring words of appreciation, though several of these compliments were almost incoherent, the men uttering them clearly in an advanced state of inebriation. For their part, the slaves all glared at me, no doubt unhappy at the paucity of table scraps and leftovers. I ignored them. It wasn't my fault if their masters were ungenerous, at least with their slaves. For myself, however, there were compliments and silver drachmas in equal and satisfying abundance. All seemed as it should be. And then Archestratus rose to his feet, beckoning me to his side. He too pressed a large coin into my hand, but as he did so, his gaze held an odd desperation. There, I had not imagined it. Archestratus was relieved by my presence, almost overwhelmingly so. What was going on? Well done, he said again. The hares were exquisite, the sesame pancakes delightful. I could have eaten nothing but pancakes and considered myself well fed. He was speaking too quickly, almost as if he feared interruption. But what chef would interrupt while his praises were being sung? And where did you find red mullets? Great Zeus himself, those were a lovely treat. But my slaves tell me there's nothing but kraken at the market these days. It was almost a question. Surely you would not have me divulge trade secrets, I murmured evasively. Archestratus was worldly enough to be unsurprised, though he did seem a little disappointed. But of course, he assured me, it is a secret of chefs. Well, a fine meal. You will be hearing from me again. Often, I would say, a fine meal. I cannot remember a feast I enjoyed so. Zeus almighty, dude, he gets the point already. A voice behind me spoke up. Startled, I turned and found myself looking straight into the eyes of Perseus, son of Zeus. He too had risen to his feet, though it was not customary for guests to do so. And then he surprised me further by snatching up my hand and pumping it enthusiastically. Most awesome eats, he enthused, doing nothing to suppress the loud belch that followed. Those rabbits were epic, dude. You totally killed that meal. Never thought I'd find grindage like that in Greece. The other dinner guests looked affronted, though whether by his ill-bred comment or his atrocious accent, I could not tell. Perseus was oblivious to them. But he paused and examined me closely. His eyes, I noted, were as golden as his long, feathery hair. The strap of a rather weathered-looking brown satchel cut across his chest. Hey, dude, you don't look Greek. I'm not, I shook my head. I hail from Lydia, Sypolis to be precise. Sypolis? The golden eyebrows drew together. Man, you want to go to the priest for that. Sounds like something you get in a brothel. He brayed with laughter at his own wit. Several of the other guests winced at the sound. Huh, he mused aloud. I never met anyone from Lydia before. It was as good an opening as I was likely to get. I took a breath, and yet we share kin, I told him. Kin? He asked. Just then, the serving slaves bustled in with the last of the second tables, the wine steward and his slaves right behind them. I was annoyed. I'd wanted the entire company to hear what I had to say, but with the advent of more food and drink, conversation had started up again around us, and the room was noisy. Your father was my grandfather, I answered loudly. Nobody appeared to have heard. Perseus himself was silent for a brief moment as he absorbed the information. Then the golden eyes widened in delight. No way. Really? Your granddad? You're my frickin' nephew? Nephew? Somehow, I had not thought the relationship through in that manner. Shouting with laughter, Perseus crushed me in a rough embrace. His satchel swung around to thump me in the side. Ha! Come here and give your old uncle a hug, dude, even though I've got to be, what, 20, 30 years younger than you? Surely not quite that much, I said a little breathlessly as he squeezed the air from my lungs. But Perseus wasn't listening. Whoa, that was epic, dude. You like totally blew my mind. He put both hands to the side of his head as if to keep his brain from exploding outwards. He laughed. I don't know why I'm so psyched. His great Zeusness always had a thing for the ladies. I've probably got nephews and nieces all over the frickin' Aegean. Conversation still swirled around us, the other guests apparently oblivious to our interaction. But seriously, dude, he leaned in, smiling. His teeth seemed too white against his tanned face. His breath reeked of wine. I totally thought you were going to say we were kin through my mom. Your mother? He shrugged. Hey, I could roll with it. Always thought she must have been insanely hot in her day. He winked and wriggled his hips lasciviously. I stared at him, shocked that he would speak publicly of his mother in such a way. Oh yeah, he continued, with the air of one telling a well-worn story. When old King Polydectes came sniffing around, she wasn't exactly slapping his hands down, was she? And when he sent me out for a gorgon's head in the middle of the night, he raised his hands in the air and shrugged. Well, I didn't hear anybody begging me not to go. Still, I'm cool with it. Everything turned out totally awesome in the end. And besides, when you get right down to it, dead ant! I shouted the last two words. And before I could even blink in confusion, every man in the room was suddenly throwing himself to the floor. They lay on their backs, all the dignitaries of Athens, arms and legs stuck up stiffly in the air, the folds of their chitons falling back to expose knife-sharp elbows and aging knobby knees. As I stood there with my mouth hanging open, the golden Perseus chortled with laughter. Ah, ah, ah! He waggled a chastising finger at one of the guests. Way slow, Xenophon. Gotta live the consequences, little ant. Chuckling with delight, he skipped over to the man, a thin, elderly individual, still lying prone on the tiled floor, and held a brimming wine cup high above his head. Bottoms up, dude, he sang out. And then, as I watched, appalled, he tipped the contents of the cup into the man's open mouth. The man, Xenophon, choked and coughed, most of the wine running down his face and spilling on his chiton. Around him, the other dinner guests were being hoisted to their feet by slaves whose eyes were as downcast as their mouths were strangely silent. Now, I could see that several of the guests had wine stains around their necks, as if they too had had cups of wine poured on their faces. Great gods, how long had they been playing this game? There were a few poorly suppressed groans as everyone resettled themselves and began rearranging their chitons. False smiles were pasted gamely onto unhappy faces. And then, just as Xenophon's slave managed to get him shakily to his feet, Perseus yelled "dead ant" again, and they were all forced to fling themselves down once more. Ha! Dude, I love being the ant master, he told me, his eyes sparkling with mischief and merriment. That's insanely cool. Can you believe they never heard of dead ant before? Shocking, I murmured, exchanging a sidelong glance with Archestratus. He did not look happy. It had been Archestratus' job as host to hire the best chef available. He had. To ensure both he and his slaves were clean and well-groomed. They were. And to provide amusements in the form of refined conversation, pleasant music, and feminine charms. He had done this as well. Even now, the city's most talented dancers and flute girls waited in the courtyard to be called in, and a cithara player, again the best Athens had to offer, had been ensconced in a corner of the andron, though he'd given up all pretense of playing and was instead taking in the proceedings with much widened eyes. Archestratus' symposium ought to have been one of elegant and refined entertainments, and yet men who might have enjoyed civilized games of kotabos in their distant youth were pretending to be dead ants on the floor. All for the great Perseus, Gorgon slayer, kraken killer, and hero of the Aegean. I felt a surge of pity for Archestratus. It would have been unpardonably rude to refuse such an exalted guest anything. And yet, from the pinched look on my client's face, I could see that he was seriously considering doing so. His dinner party, once considered the social event of the season, would henceforth be known as a debacle, a disaster tied forever to his name. And what of myself? How closely would the chef be associated with such a catastrophe? All too closely, I feared. My chest felt tight. The air was hot and close. Why had I said anything to Perseus about our shared relation? This was what I got for trying to finesse my way around the sin of hubris. One of the guests groaned audibly. They were all going to be very sore on the morrow. The young hero, however, was oblivious to their predicament, chortling with glee as he poured wine all over another hapless ant. "Dude," he shouted as I made to move off. "Where are you going?" Back to the kitchen." "Aw, don't go yet. We're just getting started." I must, I stammered. "Forgive me, my apologies." But Perseus had been distracted. "Whoa, what do you think you're doing, little ant? Did I say you could get up? Oh no, the Ant-Master's not through with you yet." With the hero thus occupied, I turned and fled, the sound of his obnoxious laugh ringing in my ears. I stopped in the courtyard, pausing to take several steadying breaths. As I returned to the kitchen, only two thoughts were in my mind. The first was, what effect would this evening's events have on my career? And the second was, how, by all the gods on Mount Olympus, could I be related to that?
They were once known as angels from in the sky.